Little black girl walks into job interview. CEO learns the truth about her mom and freezes. An 8-year-old black girl walked into a powerful tech company. Not to play, but to confront the CEO with evidence of systemic discrimination that silenced her brilliant mother. What started as a job rejection turned into a corporate reckoning, led by a child who refused to be ignored. Her name is Nina Carter, and she didn't just change one company, she sparked a movement. Who is this fearless little girl, and how did she take down an empire with nothing but truth? Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that will move your heart and challenge your mind. The receptionist didn't even look up from her glossy screen when she heard the sound of small shoes tapping lightly across the marble floor of Titantech's grand lobby. "Maintenance is through the back, sweetheart," she muttered, barely registering the presence standing before her. But the voice that answered made her glance up. "I have a 9 o'clock a.m. meeting with Mr. Elliot Vance," said the little girl, her voice calm, rehearsed, and oddly professional. The woman blinked. In front of her stood an 8-year-old black girl in a navy blue jumper dress and braided hair tied with a red ribbon. A black leather backpack hung over her shoulder, comically large against her small frame. She didn't smile. She didn't fidget. She stood with the poise of someone twice, no, 5 times, her age. "I'm sorry. You're here to do what?" The girl adjusted the strap of her backpack and repeated with perfect enunciation. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock a.m. interview with Mr. Vance. I'm delivering my mother's project proposal on her behalf. Danielle Carter." Silence washed over the lobby like a wave crashing against a pristine shore. The hum of passing executives in tailored suits slowed. Conversations trailed off. A pair of glass doors hissed shut behind someone too intrigued to keep walking. The receptionist, now properly looking at the child, tried to gather her wits. "Wait, Danielle Carter? She was scheduled today?" "She was," the girl replied, her tone unwavering. "But she was admitted to City Memorial last night. Pneumonia. She asked me to bring the proposal she's been working on for the last 3 months. She didn't want to waste your time." The woman faltered. "And you are?" "Nina Carter." A pause. Before the receptionist could summon a response, a chime echoed through the lobby. The elevator. Out stepped Elliot Vance. At 45, the founder and CEO of Titantech was a man who wore silence like a custom-fitted suit. Tall, silver-templed, with a square jaw and icy eyes that scanned everything and everyone in a room before he spoke. He was known for ruthless efficiency, zero tolerance for mediocrity, and a hiring standard that could have been etched in stone with the words, "No disruptions, no exceptions." The moment his gaze landed on the odd tableau, a child at his reception, employees lingering mid-step, he frowned. "What's going on, Sandra?" he asked, voice crisp. The receptionist sputtered slightly. "Mr. Vance, this little girl, she says she's here for the 9 o'clock. She's Miss Carter's daughter." Vance's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped to a clinical register. "Danielle Carter, from the engineering application pool?" "Yes, sir," Nina responded before the receptionist could. "She asked me to deliver her proposal. She's in the hospital." He regarded her, unmoved. "And she sent you?" "She did. With specific instructions. Everything's in the folder." Nina unzipped her backpack and pulled out a manila folder so neatly organized it looked machine-assembled. "Systematic infrastructure review, phase-specific projections, waste-to-energy conversion in corporate environments, all with ROI modeling for your upcoming audit cycle." Somewhere near the coffee station, a junior manager dropped his cup. For a moment, Vance said nothing. He stepped closer, hands in his pocket, assessing the child in front of him like one might a curiosity in a museum. "You realize how this looks," he said finally. Nina tilted her head slightly, like she'd heard that phrase 100 times. "Yes, it looks like someone's giving you something valuable and not asking for anything except a chance to be considered fairly." "You expect me to entertain a business proposal delivered by a child?" "She expected you to read the numbers," Nina corrected. The delivery method is a formality. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite disdain. And does your mother really believe that sending her daughter here, dressed like she's going to math camp, is how one conducts business? My mother believes, Nina said slowly, evenly, that truth can come in any form, and sometimes the most underestimated person in the room is the one with the clearest view. That silenced him. It silenced everyone. A few people on their way to the elevators paused. One man subtly turned down his podcast. The security guard shifted his weight and squinted, as if unsure whether to intervene or watch. Then Vance did something unexpected. He reached out and took the folder from Nina's hands. He opened the first page, and his eyes stilled. There it was, a full systems analysis of Titan Tech's energy waste, calculated with down-to-the-cent projections and annotated formulas that matched perfectly with the internal reports Danielle Carter should not have had access to. The math was flawless. The recommendations were bold, efficient, provable. He flipped another page, and another. Somewhere between page 6 and 8, his jaw tightened. Not with admiration, but discomfort. This wasn't just technical brilliance, it was a challenge, and it came from someone he'd already written off 3 months ago without so much as a phone call. "This is bold," he muttered. Nina didn't answer. He looked at her again, more carefully this time. "You memorize all this, or are you just parroting your mother?" Nina met his eyes without flinching. "I learned it. We built the models together, every night after dinner. You're 8. Correct. You shouldn't be here." She didn't reply, not in words. She merely opened her backpack again and pulled out a slim, black tablet. The screen lit up. A graph glowed. "This," she said, "is what your power draw looks like between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the east wing of your lab." He stared. She tapped the screen. "And this," she continued, "is what it could be." Vance closed the folder with a sharp snap. He looked over his shoulder at Sandra, who froze. Then he turned back to Nina. "Come with me." The elevator doors closed behind them as the room buzzed with whispers. Inside, as they rose through the 39 floors of the mirrored glass and polished steel, Vance said nothing, but his mind raced. How had this child, managed to get his attention so effectively? How had her mother acquired those internal benchmarks? Had there been a breach? And most disturbingly, why did he have the nagging feeling that he wasn't leading this interaction? He glanced sideways. Nina stood, calm, hands folded, eyes watching the floor numbers tick upward like she had all the time in the world. At the 40th floor, the elevator chimed. As they stepped out, she spoke again. "My mom says there are 2 kinds of people who can't be ignored." "Is that so?" he asked. "Yes, the ones with too much power." She looked up at him with those steady eyes, not childish in the least. "And the ones with nothing left to lose." He turned sharply, but she was already walking into his executive suite as if she belonged there. And for the first time in years, Elliot Vance had no idea what would happen next. The heavy door of the executive office clicked shut behind them with a subtle finality. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in morning light, casting long shadows over a table of polished steel and chrome. Shelves lined with awards, photos with senators, and titanium-plated patents glistened around the room like trophies of conquest. Elliot Vance moved behind his desk with practiced authority, dropping the folder onto the glass surface as if it were a report from an underperforming division. "Sit," he said, gesturing vaguely to one of the sleek modern chairs that looked like they belonged in an art museum more than an office. Nina Carter didn't hesitate. She climbed into the seat, legs dangling far from the floor, but posture straight and steady. She rested her backpack on her lap and folded her hands on top of it. "You're very composed," Vance observed, leaning back and watching her like a chess grandmaster sizing up an unexpected challenger. "Do you know how many grown men stutter when they sit across from me?" "I imagine a lot," Nina replied without blinking. "Fear has that effect on people." He raised an eyebrow. "And you're not afraid? Of you?" She tilted her head slightly. Not particularly. Vance chuckled, not warmly. You're a very strange child. Strange tends to get noticed, Nina said. It's how people like my mom survive. The smile froze on his face. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? He asked finally. Delivering a folder? Making a scene in the lobby? Are you trying to guilt me into something? Public sympathy? Is that the game? No games, she said simply. Just facts. She reached into her backpack again and pulled out a second folder, this one black and marked with color-coded tabs. Vance's eyes narrowed. What's that? My mother's contingency plan, Nina answered, in case you responded exactly the way you just did. He didn't reach for it this time. Instead, he sat forward slowly, resting his elbows on the desk. Careful now, he said. I've seen a lot of manipulation in my time. Grown adults with degrees trying to twist my words, bait me into lawsuits, frame me in the media. You think this is clever, sending a kid to catch me off guard? She didn't send me to trick you, Nina said. She sent me because she knew you wouldn't take her seriously. But maybe, just maybe, you'd pause for someone you didn't expect. Because I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? No, she said, meeting his eyes. Because I'm not afraid to say what she was too tired to anymore. Something in her tone made Vance shift. The arrogance in his expression didn't fade entirely, but it dulled, like the edge of a knife meeting unexpected resistance. Go on, he said, tapping the table. What did Danielle Carter want to say that was so important she sent her 8-year-old instead of rescheduling like a professional? She wanted you to read those numbers, Nina said, gesturing to the first folder, to see what Titan Tech could be instead of what you've trapped it into being. She also wanted you to know that she understood exactly why she was never called back. Vance narrowed his eyes. She knows what kind of resumes get callbacks, Nina continued, and which ones go straight into the denial pile. She's been watching the patterns, names, schools, addresses, rejection reasons that all sound different, but add up to the same thing. He smiled thinly. We reject thousands of applicants. We can't hire everyone. But you rarely hire anyone who looks like us, Nina said flatly. He stood up. It wasn't a dramatic move, just a slow, measured push away from the desk. He walked to the window, staring down at the city spread out beneath them. I built this company from a garage server rack and a second-hand Dell, he said. I sacrificed everything. My marriage, my health, my reputation in the early days. You think you know something about Titan Tech? You don't know a damn thing. I know the people you passed over, Nina said. He turned sharply. I know their names, she added, reaching into her backpack again. I know what they applied for. I know their qualifications. And I know they were better than some of the people you did hire. You're bluffing, he said, voice low. No, she said. I'm watching. He blinked. I've been watching, she clarified, sitting quietly while my mom applied to job after job, trying to explain to me why someone with 2 degrees and a brilliant mind kept getting told she wasn't the right fit. She tried to protect me from it, but I see things. I hear things. And when she finally couldn't take the rejection anymore, she started digging. You're telling me your mother hacked us? He growled. I'm telling you your system has cracks, Nina said. And people talk when they think no one's listening. He stared at her, now fully alert. She talked to others, Nina went on. People you rejected. People who used to work here. And someone inside, sent her files. Files you probably forgot existed. Old emails, memos, interview logs, data patterns. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Vance said quietly. Neither do you, Nina replied. The silence between them was electric. Then the door opened. Mr. Vance? A woman's voice. It was Aisha Mendez, his executive assistant. Her face was pale. I said no interruptions, he barked. I know, but there are people in the lobby, reporters, and your phone's been ringing non-stop. He turned sharply. About what? I don't know exactly, but someone leaked a statement about discriminatory hiring. His face drained of color. Nina watched him calmly. "It wasn't supposed to be public yet," she said. "But someone pushed the schedule forward. Maybe they were scared it would get buried." He turned back to her. "What do you want?" "I told you," she said softly. "A fair chance. For my mom, and for the 64 others like her. The ones you rejected because of what they looked like, or where they were from, or how old they were, or how their names sounded." "I don't hire based on race," he snapped. "No, you filter based on patterns," Nina replied, "and the patterns don't lie." She slid the second folder across the desk. "You can look or not. Either way, they're already in the hands of someone who will." Vance didn't move. The door behind him was still open. Isha hadn't left. She was staring at Nina with something like awe. "You're making a mistake," Vance said at last. "You think you're delivering justice, but what you're doing could destroy Titan Tech." "No," Nina said, getting up. "What I'm doing is giving you the chance to save it, because if we wanted to destroy it, we'd have gone straight to the press." "And if I don't play along?" he asked. She walked toward the door, pausing just before she left. "Then you'll be remembered as the man who underestimated the wrong little girl." She looked over her shoulder, her voice calm. "Mom always says, when you're used to winning by default, fairness feels like a threat." And with that, she stepped out. Vance stared at the folders on his desk, hands trembling. In all his years, no one, not a board member, not a senator, not even a hostile investor, had ever made him feel so completely cornered. And the worst part? She hadn't raised her voice once. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft whoosh, sealing off the hum of the outside world. Inside, the air was still, too still. Only the quiet mechanical whir of the lift rising floor by floor filled the silence, and even that seemed muffled under the weight of what had just unfolded. Elliot Vance stood on one side, hands clasped behind his back, face rigid, jaw set. Nina Carter stood on the other, arms folded across her backpack, watching the glowing numbers ascend. 31, 32, 33. Neither spoke for several seconds. Vance, who had stared down senators and CEOs without flinching, found himself unnerved by the unshaken calm of the child beside him. He tried to break the silence, to regain some ground. "You're very sure of yourself for someone who's barely tall enough to reach the elevator button." Nina didn't flinch. "Mom says confidence doesn't come from size. It comes from preparation." He raised an eyebrow. "And you think you're prepared for this?" "I think I've spent more time understanding your company than some of your own board members," she replied, her eyes fixed on the elevator display. "I think that scares you." That made him turn toward her ever so slightly. "Scare me? A child?" "Not me," she said. "What I represent." The words landed with a quiet thud. The elevator ticked to 35. "I know what you're trying to do," he said, attempting a tone of authority. "Create drama. Manufacture a moment. Paint me into a corner. It's a PR stunt, and I don't respond to threats. Not from adults, and certainly not from kids." "You're not supposed to respond," Nina said. "You're supposed to reflect." "Excuse me?" She turned to him fully now, her face composed but her eyes sharp. "You think this is about you being a villain. It's not. It's about a system you built to protect your comfort. A system where talent isn't enough unless it looks a certain way, sounds a certain way, lives in a certain zip code." He opened his mouth, but she kept going. "You didn't just reject my mom. You rejected people like her for years, over and over. You created a machine that filters out anything unfamiliar and calls it culture fit. But it's not fit. It's fear." The elevator hit 38. He glanced at the floor counter as if searching for escape. Nina's voice softened. "You didn't expect us to come back. Most people don't. That's the power you count on, but not everyone stays quiet forever." Vance clenched his jaw. "You talk like you've lived a lifetime." She looked up at him then, eyes too old for her round cheeks and ribboned braids. "I've watched my mom cry at 2 in the morning over rejection emails. I've seen her edit a resume 27 times just to try to sound more neutral. I've helped her practice interview answers until her voice cracked. That teaches you something about life." The elevator chimed at floor 39. They both faced forward again. The doors would open on the next floor, revealing the highest level of Titan Tech, reserved for VPs, billion-dollar project leads, and Vance himself. But in that final moment of seclusion, Nina said something that made Vance's spine stiffen. "Mom always says the most dangerous people are the ones who've got nothing to lose." He turned his head, eyes narrowed. "We're both in that category now," Nina added softly. His voice, when it came, was low and defensive. "You're just a child." She nodded. "Yes. And children ask the questions adults are too scared to answer." The doors opened. A sea of glass, light, and power lay ahead. Polished floors stretched into offices lined with framed patents, plaques from defense contractors, and portraits of presidents who had once praised Vance's vision. The corridor was pristine, an altar to innovation and exclusivity. But as they stepped out, something felt different to Vance. The silence didn't feel respectful. It felt watchful. He led her to his office. The room swallowed them whole with its size. Massive desk, massive views, massive emptiness. His assistant, Mrs. Holloway, blinked in confusion when she saw Nina. "Cancel all appointments," he said abruptly. "Until further notice?" "Yes, sir," she answered, stunned. Inside, he gestured for Nina to sit again. She did so with grace, as if she'd been invited to hundreds of such meetings. Vance remained standing, pacing slowly behind his desk. "Let's get to the bottom of this," he began, tone clipped. "What exactly do you and your mother want?" Nina unzipped her backpack once more and laid out both folders, stacking them neatly, carefully, like laying out evidence before a court. "We want what we've always wanted," she said. "A fair chance." "You already had a chance," he snapped. "We reviewed her application." "You dismissed her in 20 seconds," Nina interrupted, her voice calm but steady. "Because her last job was at a non-profit and not a defense contractor. Because she didn't come from MIT, even though she built an autonomous drone system used in emergency rescue missions. You said she lacked industry familiarity, but we both know that wasn't the real reason." "You're accusing me of discrimination?" he challenged. "I'm pointing out a pattern," she replied. "You can call it whatever makes you feel better." He was losing ground, and he knew it. Nina leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "You know how many resumes Titan Tech has rejected from black women engineers with more than 10 years' experience in the last 5 years? 64. "Coincidence," Vance said immediately. Nina shook her head. "Statistical impossibility." He scoffed. She pulled out a third item, an envelope. Inside were printed graphs, data points, even excerpts of internal emails. "These were sent to us by someone inside," she explained. "Someone who was tired of the excuses, of the way your managers were told to guard the company culture, of how you rewarded them for keeping teams streamlined." His face drained of color. She placed the graphs on his desk like cards in a poker game. "This is your hiring algorithm. Biased inputs, biased outcomes. You filtered out anyone who didn't fit a mold, white, male, Ivy League, under 40, and you thought no one would notice." "I built that system," he said, his voice suddenly defensive. "It's efficient." "It's exclusion with a coat of paint," Nina answered. "And it's about to come off." He fell into his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He stared at her, at the folders, at the data, at the undeniable. Then came the sound neither of them expected. Buzz. His intercom lit up. "Mr. Vance," Mrs. Holloway's voice came through, barely composed. "There's a man in the lobby. He says he's Roberto Reyes. He's a civil rights attorney. He insists he's here on urgent business related to the girl." Vance paled. "Now?" "Yes, sir. And there are also 3 journalists from the Ledger and Channel 5 requesting comment." Nina smiled gently, not the smile of a child but of someone who had just pulled the final lever of a complex machine. That's the second wave, she said softly. Mom scheduled it in case you needed a little motivation. He stood up suddenly, pacing, sweat beginning to form at his temple. You've set me up. We gave you options, Nina said. You picked this one. He whirled on her. You don't get to dictate how this ends. But even as he said it, the truth sat in front of him in cold, undeniable silence. He no longer controlled the narrative. And the worst part? A little girl had wrested it from his hands, without ever raising her voice. Elliot Vance paced his office like a man whose fortress had suddenly sprouted windows. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, not just from the evidence lying neatly arranged on his desk, but from the pair of steady eyes watching him from the chair opposite, eyes that belonged to an 8-year-old, and yet somehow seemed older than his own. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled silver hair and let out a breath that came out more like a growl. You've made your point, he muttered. Now, what exactly do you and your mother want? Nina leaned back slightly in her seat as if considering the phrasing carefully. We're not asking for favors, Mr. Vance, just corrections. What kind of corrections? She reached into her backpack, again, and pulled out a third folder, thinner than the last two but no less organized. She slid it across the table with the cool professionalism of someone who knew she held the stronger hand. First, she said, hire my mother, not as an entry-level engineer, but in the role she's qualified for, senior lead in sustainability and infrastructure. Vance scoffed. You expect me to promote someone who hasn't even worked here? She already works here, Nina replied. You've just been ignoring her resume like it was invisible, but now that you've seen the impact of her proposal, you know she's more than qualified. Or did you think the 30% cost reduction model built itself? His lips pressed into a hard line, but he didn't argue. Second, she continued, publicly announce a review of your company's hiring practices. Hire a third-party audit group to assess diversity bias in your recruitment systems. Vance narrowed his eyes. You want to humiliate me? No, she said calmly. We want you to evolve, publicly, because if it doesn't happen with your consent, it will happen with your exposure. His temper flared and he stood up suddenly. This is blackmail. No, Nina said, not moving. This is leverage. Blackmail is illegal. Evidence-based advocacy is not. Vance clenched his fists at his sides. He had played hardball in billion-dollar mergers, crushed competitors with a single op-ed, survived attacks from Wall Street wolves and anti-tech lobbyists. But now, right now, he was boxed in by a girl who couldn't even legally open a bank account. Before he could bark a response, a knock came at the door. His assistant peeked in. Mr. Vance, she said hesitantly. Mr. Roberto Reyes is in the waiting room. He says he's here for a scheduled meeting about employment discrimination. Also, the Channel 5 crew is setting up in the lobby. Vance's face turned an unnatural shade of pale. You scheduled media? He asked, voice hoarse. Nina offered a shrug that was both casual and surgical. We figured you'd either reform voluntarily, or we'd need to bring in some help. He stared at her, throat dry. Who are you? She gave him the kind of smile he imagined lawyers gave right before the jury read a guilty verdict. Just a kid with good timing. At that moment, the door opened wider, and in walked Roberto Reyes, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a deep navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had been through more courtrooms than Vance had seen contracts. Mr. Vance, Reyes said, his voice polite but firm. Thank you for seeing me. I understand we're a little earlier than planned, but I hope you don't mind. I do, Vance snapped. I mind very much. Reyes didn't flinch. Then let's talk quickly. We have a pending class action, prepared statements, and 2 folders of corroborated documentation. That's enough to trigger a Department of Labor investigation by end of day. I built this company, Vance shouted, his composure crumbling. You think I'm just going to hand it over because some bitter engineer and her overachieving daughter caught me on a bad day? No, Reyes said, setting the briefcase on the desk and opening it with a click. We think you should do what's right before it becomes what you're forced to do. He began sliding documents across the desk. Printed emails from hiring committees, transcripts of internal strategy meetings, even budget reports noting team uniformity bonuses. Vance's heart sank. This is protected company data. It's not, Reyes replied. Not when it reveals illegal hiring practices, not when multiple sources inside the company provided it, independent of one another, not when it's attached to 32 signed affidavits from former applicants. I can fight this, Vance said, but his voice was losing its usual steel. Titan Tech has resources, legal teams. You do, Reyes agreed. But you also have a share price that will nosedive by tomorrow morning if this story breaks as is. Or you can choose option B. Vance looked between him and Nina. What's option B? Reyes folded his hands. Implement a formal diversity and inclusion program. Hire Ms. Carter immediately. Announce internal changes before noon. And begin compensation discussions for the 64 rejected candidates, voluntarily. Vance blinked slowly, the word voluntarily echoing in his mind like a mockery. I can't just reverse 64 hiring decisions. You can, Nina said quietly, especially if they were never based on merit to begin with. There was no rage in her voice, no childish vindictiveness, only clarity. For a long moment, silence blanketed the room. Then Vance dropped back into his chair, drained. He looked older than his polished photos, smaller somehow, and most of all, outmaneuvered. You're going to destroy me, he whispered. No, Reyes said, with surprising softness. You destroyed your reputation. We're just making sure it stops hurting other people. Another knock. Vance didn't even look up this time. Mr. Vance, the assistant called through the door. The board is downstairs. They said it's an emergency meeting. They've been notified of the media presence. Of course they had. Titan Tech's board didn't miss scandals. They predicted them. Vance exhaled through his nose. He turned back to Nina, who was now calmly organizing her papers, placing them back into her backpack like a child putting away schoolwork. She looked up. This was your chance to lead, Mr. Vance. Not just manage. Lead. Her words landed gently, but they burned. Vance rubbed his temples. And if I agree, what then? Then you get to write a different ending, Reyes said. Nina stood, and for the first time she extended her hand. Not to gloat, not to dominate, but to offer a closing handshake, a symbol of something far more grown-up than revenge. It took him a second, but he took her hand. Her grip was small, but strong. As she turned to leave, she paused. One more thing, she said. Vance looked up, exhausted. What now? When you announce this, don't do it from your high-rise or in a press release. Do it in person. Look into the eyes of the people you overlooked. That's how you earn change, one face at a time. And then she walked out. Elliot Vance slumped in his chair, a man surrounded not by enemies, but by consequences. The only thing more terrifying than the lawsuit was the truth behind it, and the girl who had delivered it like a prophecy. The first wave hit before noon. It began with whispers in the hallway, soft, speculative murmurs exchanged between analysts clutching their coffee mugs and project leads who paused just a second too long before entering meetings. Titan Tech had always been a fortress, its secrets tightly held within the elite walls of power and performance. But now, the walls were trembling. At 11:04 a.m., a single headline splashed across the homepage of the Business Tribune. Titan Tech, accused of systemic discrimination in hiring. Internal memos leaked. By 11:07, a reporter from Channel 5 was broadcasting live from the building's lobby, camera lights blazing against the reflective glass. Behind her, employees gawked, frozen in mid-commute between departments, phones raised, whispering names they recognized from the headline. The leak included sample rejection letters, email screenshots, and references to something called the Titan 64. By 11:12, the company's stock dropped 3 points. And falling. In the 40th floor conference room, Elliot Vance stood stiffly at the window, arms folded behind his back, staring out at the skyline like it held the answers. But it didn't. Not anymore. His phone buzzed violently on the table behind him. 10 missed calls from board members, 4 from legal counsel, 1 from his wife. The last came from Titan Tech's PR director, the subject line all caps. "Where is the statement?" He turned slowly, his breath measured but heavy. On the table sat 3 folders, one thick with technical projections, one full of damning diversity metrics, and the last, a printed list of 64 names. All of it had started with a child in his lobby. No, started wasn't the right word. The match had been struck long before. But she had walked in with the gasoline. Now the fire was burning. At 11:21, Patricia Mendez from HR stormed into his office without knocking, her badge swinging wildly on its lanyard. "You need to talk to them," she snapped. "Now, before this gets worse." "They're already preparing a joint statement," Vance said without turning. "From legal." "No one wants legal spin. They want leadership." She stepped forward, voice hardening. "You think these people are going to wait while your lawyers sanitize everything? The building's boiling over. And some of us have been quiet for too long." She threw down a copy of the internal email that had leaked, the one where a senior VP had casually referred to keeping a clean culture in his hiring strategy. Vance's face flushed. "That email is 10 years old," he muttered. "But it's still happening," she shot back. "You just got better at disguising it." He didn't deny it. Downstairs, a makeshift podium had been hastily assembled by security, not for a press conference, at least not officially, but to attempt containment. As reporters gathered with microphones extended like weapons, they caught sight of a young girl emerging from the executive elevator. Nina Carter, flanked by her mother, Danielle Carter, now upright and composed despite the weariness in her eyes, and Roberto Reyes, the civil rights attorney who had triggered the corporate tremor. Nina's backpack bounced lightly as she walked, utterly unaffected by the stares, the lights, the attention. She might as well have been walking through a school hallway. Danielle looked up at the ceiling with a deep breath, clearly still recovering from her recent hospital stay. But the fire in her was unmistakable. This was not a woman interested in vengeance. This was a woman who had outwaited the storm and stepped forward anyway. "Do you think he'll come down?" she whispered to Nina. Nina looked toward the elevator. "He will." "What if he doesn't?" "Then we'll speak without him," she said with a shrug. But at 11:30 sharp, the elevator chimed again, and Elliot Vance emerged. He looked thinner than usual, no blazer, just a shirt, sleeves rolled, tie slightly loosened, the fatigue around his eyes betraying the weight of the past 4 hours. A hush fell over the lobby. He approached the podium slowly, each step sounding heavier than the last. The crowd, employees, reporters, security, watched as the CEO took the microphone. No written statement, no teleprompter, just silence stretching longer than it should have until he finally spoke. "I've made mistakes," he said, "and I've let a culture grow that favored a certain kind of success over others that were equally deserving." Gasps. A few phones were raised higher. Reporters leaned forward. "I see that now because someone had the courage to show me what I refused to look at." He turned slightly to glance at Nina. "And because of that, change starts today. Effective immediately, Danielle Carter has been hired as Director of Sustainable Infrastructure and Innovation. She will also advise the creation of a new Diversity and Equity Council here at Titan Tech." Applause broke out, unsure at first, then growing. "Additionally, we will be reviewing all hiring decisions from the last 5 years. If we find that qualified candidates were rejected based on unfair criteria, spoken or unspoken, we will reach out. We will offer compensation, and in some cases, a second chance." A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to type. And yet, Nina watched him with the same stillness she had maintained from the beginning. Her mother took her hand. Warm, proud, but visibly shaken. They both knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the real work. After the announcement, as reporters swarmed with questions and employees shared silent looks of relief or disbelief, Vance stepped down from the platform. For a second, he paused before Nina. "Why didn't you just go to the press first?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Because if you had any decency left, I wanted you to find it yourself. And if I hadn't? Then you'd be watching this from your phone, alone." He nodded slowly. "You're something else." "I'm just a mirror," she said. "What you saw is who you've always been." Danielle stepped forward now, meeting Vance's eyes for the first time since her last rejection email. "I don't need an apology," she said, "but I'll accept accountability. For myself. For the others who never got this chance." He gave a short nod. "You'll have full authority. No red tape." She smiled. "Good. Then let's get to work." As the lobby thinned, as cameras shut off and statements were sent to every major media outlet, the core of the Titan Tech began to shift. Not just structurally, but culturally. Word spread across departments. Those who had suffered in silence now whispered with hope. Those who had benefited from the system sat quieter than usual. But the loudest shift was not heard through applause or news anchors. It was seen, in the way people began looking at Nina Carter, not as a child, but as the reason they still had a chance to make things right. 6 months later, Titan Tech didn't look like the same company. Not because of a logo rebrand or a glossy PR campaign, though those had followed swiftly, but because of something deeper. Something real. It was in the way people paused before they spoke in meetings, in the new names appearing on office doors, and in the undeniable shift in the company's heartbeat. For the first time in years, innovation wasn't just a buzzword. It was the lived reality of the people building it. And at the center of that quiet revolution was Danielle Carter. Now Director of Sustainable Infrastructure and Innovation, Danielle moved through the halls of Titan Tech like she belonged there, which of course she always had. The difference was, now everyone else knew it too. She wore her power lightly, preferring practical flats over heels and minimalist suits over status symbols. But the authority she carried was unmistakable. Her office was always open. Her calendar was always full. And her ideas, they were being implemented with a speed that startled even the most senior executives. Her most audacious project, Project Phoenix, had already reduced Titan Tech's annual operating costs by 17%. By next quarter, it was projected to hit 30%. And unlike past initiatives that ignored sustainability for short-term profit, Danielle's model had struck a rare balance: cost efficiency, environmental responsibility, and scalable design. During a leadership summit in Boston, she was asked to speak about her team's breakthrough in urban energy redistribution. When she stepped on stage, the room of CEOs and tech investors stood to applaud before she even opened her mouth. But Danielle wasn't interested in personal applause. The real change, she believed, was happening in quieter places, in the restructured hiring department, where new filters were put in place to catch unconscious bias, in the mentorship program she launched for first-generation engineers, and most importantly, in the second-floor break room, where 3 Black interns were now eating lunch together and talking about their capstone projects without a hint of self-consciousness. As for Elliot Vance, the transformation of Titan Tech had come at a price he never expected. He was still on paper the company's founder and honorary chairman, but the board had made their move quickly, quietly, and decisively. His voting power was stripped. His day-to-day role was eliminated. He kept an office, but it had no meetings, no authority, just silence. He watched the company he had built evolve without him. Sometimes he would pass Danielle in the halls. She always nodded politely, never smugly. She didn't need to be vindictive. Success had spoken louder than any accusation ever could. Once, as she stepped into the elevator, he caught her gaze. "You're doing a good job," he said. She paused. "No," she replied gently, "I'm just giving people the space to do their best work." Then the doors closed. In her office, just across from a framed certificate from MIT awarded to her post-promotion, was a photo of Nina on the day the diversity reforms were signed into action. She was standing at the Titan Tech podium, her backpack slung proudly over her shoulder, her little fist raised not in defiance, but in determined joy. Nina, now 9, was thriving. The company had awarded her a full academic scholarship, an initiative Danielle insisted be extended to all employees' children from underrepresented communities. Nina attended one of the top preparatory schools in the city, where she was already being fast-tracked for gifted science courses and leading a robotics team comprised entirely of girls. Despite the sudden spotlight, she remained deeply grounded. Most afternoons, she could still be found in her mother's office, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her tablet, helping organize interview transcripts or analyzing data sets. To visitors, she was the CEO's daughter in everything but name. To employees, she was the spark that had started the fire. One Thursday afternoon, a group of senior engineers gathered in the conference room to review the impact of Danielle's diversity initiative. The atmosphere was focused, respectful, and filled with something rarely found in Titan Tech's past: curiosity. "I can't believe I used to think a homogeneous team was more efficient," said Marcus Chu, a systems lead who'd once rolled his eyes at HR briefings. Danielle raised an eyebrow, teasing. "Are you saying you miss being the smartest person in the room?" He grinned. "I'm saying it's nice not being the only one with ideas worth listening to." Everyone laughed, not out of politeness, but connection. At the end of the meeting, Patricia Mendez, recently promoted to Vice President of Human Resources, leaned in and whispered to Danielle, "Your daughter's more famous than all of us combined. I heard someone in accounting call her Little Justice." Danielle smiled, amused. She hates that nickname. "Too late," Patricia laughed. "It's carved into the company's Slack already." Outside the meeting room, Nina was giving a tour to a visiting group of high school students from an inner-city education initiative Danielle had launched with Titan Tech funding. One of the students, a tall, quiet boy named Malachi, asked nervously, "How did you get all those grown-ups to listen to you?" Nina considered the question carefully. "I didn't try to sound bigger than I was," she said. "I just didn't make myself smaller." Later, she repeated that line to her mother during dinner. Danielle, still dressed in her work blazer, paused mid-bite and looked at her daughter with astonishment. "That's a better quote than anything I've said on record," she said. Nina beamed. "You're welcome." Reyes, the attorney who had helped bring the case forward, stayed in touch. Once a month, he had lunch with Danielle and Nina to catch up. The last time they met, they sat under a tree in the city park, unpacking takeout boxes. "You know what impresses me most?" Reyes said, chewing thoughtfully. "It's not the lawsuit, not even the reforms. It's how fast people forgot who they feared and started following who they trust." Danielle nodded. "Fear fades when people are given permission to hope." He smiled. "You're going to change more than Titan Tech." She didn't reply. She didn't need to, because later that night, as she and Nina walked through their apartment, modest, still, but filled with warmth and light, they paused in the hallway. Framed on the wall were 2 items: her first rejection letter from Titan Tech, and next to it, her new business card. Below the card, a small plaque engraved by Nina read, "Proof that justice isn't a dream. It's a decision." Titan Tech hadn't just been rebuilt, it had been reimagined. Not by a revolution of fire, but of facts, of fairness, of one girl who knew the power of a question asked at the right time. And now that the foundation had shifted, there was no going back. On the anniversary of the day she walked into Titan Tech's lobby with nothing but her mother's portfolio and a backpack full of hope, Nina Carter stood in front of an auditorium filled with people who once would have never noticed her. The United Nations Youth Leadership Summit had invited her as their youngest-ever keynote speaker. She was 10 minutes early. Of course she was. Wearing a simple navy dress, a braided bun, and her signature pin, a small silver gear etched with the word change, Nina stood backstage, holding a stack of note cards she wouldn't need. She had practiced this speech a dozen times, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she knew what it meant to speak in spaces her mother had once been locked out of. Danielle Carter stood in the front row, her hand clutched around a phone she was definitely not recording on, despite the red light blinking quietly in her lap. She wore a deep plum blazer and a look of such pride, it eclipsed even the dazzling lights on the stage. The MC stepped to the podium. Our next speaker is 9 years old. But don't let her age fool you. She's already rewritten corporate policy, launched education initiatives in underprivileged neighborhoods, and made a few grown men cry in boardrooms. Please welcome Nina Carter. The applause was thunderous. Nina stepped onto the stage with the same calm grace she had shown the day she confronted a billionaire CEO. No notes, no hesitation, just clarity. "Good morning," she said, and the room settled instantly. When I first stood in a corporate lobby to deliver my mother's job application, most people didn't believe I belonged there, not because of what I said, but because of what I looked like, and how small I seemed. She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. They saw a little girl. They didn't see the truth she carried. There wasn't a single cough or shuffle in the auditorium. Only eyes, hundreds of them, fixed on her. I didn't come here today to talk about revenge, or even justice. I came here to talk about power, the kind we all have but are told to wait to use. When you're older, when you have a degree, when you have experience. But what if waiting is the problem? Several heads nodded. Even some of the older delegates leaned forward. We tell kids to speak up, but then we don't listen. We say we want change, but then we ask it to show up in a suit and tie. She smiled gently. I showed up in sneakers and a school uniform, and I asked a question no one wanted to answer. Danielle's throat tightened. She remembered that day, the elevator, the silence, the moment she feared she had sent her daughter into a lion's den, and the moment that same daughter stepped out of it with a lion's mane of her own. What I learned, Nina continued, is that courage isn't loud. It's consistent. It's saying the truth, even when your voice shakes, even when no one expects you to speak. A soft cheer rose from a group of young women in the third row. Nina paused to let it settle. I know what you're thinking. I'm just a kid. What can I really change? She tilted her head, letting the question land. You can change everything. One policy, one conversation, one question asked at the right time to the right person, in the right way. Her hands clasped gently in front of her. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs space. As she wrapped up, she looked directly at a girl in the front row, maybe 10, maybe 11, holding a worn notebook in her lap and a look in her eyes that said, I didn't know I could dream this big. To anyone who's ever been told to wait their turn, Nina said, don't. You're not early. You're right on time. The room exploded in applause. A standing ovation. Danielle stood too, clapping hard enough her palms stung. After the speech, reporters swarmed. Business leaders offered scholarships. One NGO asked Nina to consult on their youth program. She smiled politely, shook hands, but when she found her mother again in the lobby, she just asked, Did I talk too fast? Danielle laughed. You were perfect. On the way home, Nina rested her head against the car window. They passed billboards for companies she once couldn't imagine working with. Now, many had hired from the Titan 64. I'm glad he stepped down, Nina said softly, breaking the silence. Danielle didn't have to ask who he was. I'm glad too, she replied. But I'm even more glad he listened, before it was too late. That evening, back at Titan Tech headquarters, the building was quieter than usual. But change was still humming in the walls. Patricia Mendez, now VP of HR, was preparing to present the company's latest data at a press conference. Hiring equity was up 47%. Retention of minority employees had more than doubled. And productivity, higher than it had ever been under Vance. She looked at the final slide, an image of Nina standing beside her mother in front of the Titan Tech logo, and smiled. Across town, Danielle logged into her internal dashboard and approved the latest budget for a new internship program called Voices Rising, designed to train young activists in tech policy and ethics. Nina helped choose the name. Later that night, as they sat on the couch eating popcorn and watching an old documentary about the civil rights movement, Nina asked, "Do you think they would have liked me? The ones who marched?" Danielle turned to her daughter, her eyes soft. "They would have followed you." Nina thought for a second. "Maybe one day, I'll march too." "You already are," Danielle said. "Every step you take is moving someone forward." A few days later, Nina received a letter in the mail from a boy in Chicago who had watched her speech online. It read, "Dear Nina, I didn't think someone like me could ever speak up until I saw you do it. I asked my principal why our school never talks about injustice. He told me to write something for the school newspaper, so I did. They're publishing it next week. Thank you. You made me brave." Nina folded the letter slowly, holding it like something sacred. Danielle watched from the doorway, silent. They both knew. This wasn't just about Titan Tech anymore. This was a wave, a movement, a map for how courage travels. It starts in a whisper. It moves through silence. And then it speaks, clearly, fiercely, and without apology. That night, Nina sat at her desk scribbling notes for her next project, a kid-friendly guide to labor rights and social justice, translated into 5 languages, free to download. She titled it, "Small Voice, Big Change." The journey that had begun with a denied job application and a girl in a lobby was no longer just their story. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told no and chose to ask why not. And though the world hadn't completely changed, it was bending, slightly, powerfully, toward justice, toward truth, toward the sound of a small voice finally being heard. 3 hours had passed since the final press conference ended, but the ripple hadn't even begun to settle. Social media was ablaze. Hashtags like #Justice at Titan Tech, #Nina Carter Effect, and #Voices Rising trended across multiple platforms. The video of Nina's UN speech had been clipped, subtitled, and shared in over 20 countries. Parents posted clips of their children imitating her gestures, quoting her words. Educators debated curriculum changes. Corporations began issuing their own internal statements, hoping to show they were on the right side of change. But Nina Carter? She was in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of her mother's old laptop, snacking on dried mangoes and reviewing a list of outreach proposals. Danielle watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Her daughter was changing the world, and still couldn't go to bed without something sweet. "You know," Danielle said gently, "most kids your age are making friendship bracelets or learning TikTok dances." Nina looked up, grinning. "I can do both." Danielle laughed. "I don't doubt it." They'd spent the entire afternoon fielding calls, some from senators, some from CEOs, one even from a children's publisher wanting to turn Nina's life into a graphic novel. It was dizzying, overwhelming, but beneath all the buzz, something steady beat at the core of their story: vindication. Not just for them, but for the 64 names on that original list, the ones Titan Tech had once deemed invisible. Danielle sat on the bed watching Nina scroll. "Have you heard from Malachi?" she asked, the quiet boy Nina had met during the student visit to Titan Tech. Nina nodded. "He emailed. He started a tech club at his school, called it Disruptors. Isn't that perfect?" "It's very you," Danielle said, eyes twinkling. That night, as Nina finally crawled into bed, after 3 requests for just 10 more minutes, Danielle returned to her own desk where the final diversity audit sat waiting. It was a thick document, dense with data, but reading it felt like breathing air that had always been there, just cleaner now. Across the top was the summary she had fought so long to make true. For the first time in company history, hiring patterns show proportional equity across racial, gender, and socioeconomic lines. Below that, retention rates up. Internal promotions up. Anonymous satisfaction surveys showed an 82% increase in employee trust. Danielle didn't cry. Not exactly. But she let herself sit still, one hand resting gently over the printed names of the Titan 64, her mind drifting back to the early days, when she'd sit at the kitchen table with rejection emails open beside an untouched dinner plate, wondering what more she could possibly do, wondering how long she'd be overlooked. Now, here she was, directing the very system that once erased her. It wasn't revenge, it was redemption, and it was much, much bigger than her. The next morning, Danielle and Nina were invited to Titan Tech for a formal ceremony, something the board called the Legacy Recognition Initiative. Most thought it was just symbolic, a press move. But when Danielle arrived and saw what had actually been planned, she stood frozen at the front entrance for a full 30 seconds. The lobby had changed. Gone was the sleek, cold corporate minimalism. In its place was a new wall, built from reclaimed wood and steel, etched with 64 names, each one a former applicant who had been systemically denied. Above the names, in bold titanium letters, no longer overlooked, never again invisible. Beneath that, smaller but powerful, inspired by the courage of Nina and Danielle Carter. Nina stepped forward, her hand trailing the engraving. She paused when she saw the final line, her own words, spoken months ago, now immortalized in brushed metal. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one telling the truth. Danielle didn't cry this time either, but her hand trembled as she reached for Nina's. Behind them, the board of directors gathered quietly. Patricia Mendez was there, smiling with eyes that had once seen this company from the inside out, even when others refused to look. James Morrison, now Director of Ethics and Compliance, nodded solemnly. Dr. Roberto Reyes stood at the back, arms crossed, face unreadable but proud. Elliot Vance didn't attend. He had quietly stepped down 2 weeks prior, issuing a final statement that acknowledged his failures and expressed hope that Titan Tech's next chapter will be written by those who once had to knock the loudest just to be heard. No one mourned his absence. His chapter had ended. Nina and Danielle were building the new one. After the ceremony, during a private luncheon on the 40th floor, Danielle gave a brief address, not one of self-congratulation, but of gratitude. She thanked the whistleblowers. She thanked the 64 for not giving up. She thanked Patricia and James for speaking up even when it risked their jobs. And then she turned to Nina. She taught me that being brave isn't just about speaking loudly. It's about refusing to accept silence as the only option. The room erupted in applause. Later, as the two of them rode the elevator down, Danielle turned to Nina and said, "You changed the direction of an entire company." Nina shrugged. "You changed the foundation. I just knocked on the door until someone opened it." Danielle laughed. "You didn't knock, baby. You kicked it open." When they reached the ground floor, a reporter waiting by the security desk stopped them. "Just one quote," he begged. "For the follow-up story. What's next for the Carters?" Danielle smiled. "More voices, more stories. We're just getting started." Nina added, "We're launching a nonprofit." The reporter blinked. "At 9? "At any age," Nina replied. The nonprofit was called Brighter Tables, a nod to the saying, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring your own." Its mission, help kids and their parents advocate for equity in workplaces and schools alike. It offered free digital toolkits, mentorship pairings, and storytelling workshops to empower the underestimated. Within 2 months, the organization had partnerships with 5 Fortune 500 companies. Nina became the face of the campaign. Not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she understood how to use it. She was on Time's Young Visionaries list by fall, and on the cover of Wired by winter. And still, on Thursdays, she helped her mom organize spreadsheets. Because the work didn't end with a headline. It ended with people being seen, being heard, being treated like they always should have been. One Sunday afternoon, as Danielle and Nina prepared dinner together, Nina said, You know what the best part of this is? Danielle glanced over, chopping onions. What? That the people who tried to ignore us now have to learn from us. Danielle smiled. And we're going to teach them, even if it's uncomfortable. The doorbell rang. Another delivery of handwritten letters from kids across the country. Nina sorted them into boxes. Educators, parents, students, survivors. Each letter carried a piece of someone else's story. And thanks to a girl who refused to shrink, those stories now had a place. The world had tried to keep Nina and Danielle out, but instead they had built something better. Not just a seat, a legacy. In the heart of this powerful story lies a lesson that transcends age, status, and expectation. Courage is not measured by how loud you speak, but by your willingness to speak up when silence is easier. Nina Carter didn't change the world with force or fame. She changed it with truth, determination, and a question asked at the right time. Her mother, Danielle, proved that dignity and competence cannot be erased by rejection, and that resilience is a form of quiet, unyielding strength. What this story teaches us is that real change begins the moment we stop waiting for permission to be seen. Whether you're a child, a parent, or a professional who's been told you're not the right fit, your voice matters. Sometimes the system is broken, not because people are weak, but because they've been convinced they must stay silent to survive. But as Nina and Danielle showed us, you can build something extraordinary from the very pieces meant to keep you out. This is a reminder to every underestimated soul. Your story isn't over. It may just be the chapter the world desperately needs. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? What part of this story inspired you most? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that empower, uplift, and remind us that even the smallest voice can make the biggest impact. Thank you for being here.